Europe is relatively small compared to other continents. So logically, it could have been one single country. But instead, it's divided into dozens of nations packed closely together. Some of them are so small they can be crossed in just a few hours. So why didn't it ever become one country? What exactly prevented Europe from ever becoming one? One of the biggest reasons is Europe's terrain. Massive mountain ranges like the Alps cut straight across the continent. These aren't small hills, but massive natural walls. For most of history, crossing them was slow and extremely difficult. So populations on each side stayed separated. And over time, they developed into completely different regions. Mountains weren't the only barriers. Europe's rivers also shaped divisions. Rivers like the Rhine became natural boundaries between regions. These rivers were wide, powerful, and difficult to cross. Before modern bridges, crossing them was slow and risky. So communities on each side stayed separate for long periods. And over time, these natural lines became lasting borders. Europe's coastline is highly irregular and deeply fragmented. Large peninsulas like the Iberian Peninsula were naturally separated from the rest of Europe. Surrounded by water on multiple sides, these regions developed independently. The same pattern appears in places like Italy, stretching deep into the Mediterranean. With so many peninsulas, Europe was naturally split into multiple regions. And each of these regions followed its own path over time. Even within a small area, Europe has very different climates, from cold northern regions to warm southern coasts. In colder regions, life was shaped by harsh winters, while in the south, conditions were much warmer and more stable. These differences influenced how people settled and lived. And over time, these differences help shape separate regions. Europe isn't just one continuous landmass. Parts of it are separated by water. Places like the British Isles sit just off the mainland but remain disconnected. Even a narrow stretch of water was enough to limit movement in the past. Some regions like Iceland are far more isolated, surrounded by open ocean. Over time, these isolated areas developed in their own direction. And that separation eventually turned into completely different countries. Europe's landscape wasn't easy to move across, and that slowed expansion. Dense forests covered large parts of the continent for centuries. Swamps and wetlands made certain regions even harder to cross. Even open land could be difficult due to uneven and rugged terrain. All these barriers slowed communication between regions. And over time, that slowed unity and kept regions apart. For most of history, Europe wasn't one large country, but many small kingdoms. Each region controlled its own land instead of joining together. Even neighboring areas often remained independent for long periods. Instead of merging, many regions stayed separate and built their own systems. This created a pattern of many small regions instead of one unified space. And that pattern still shapes the map of Europe today. Europe isn't that large, but distances used to feel much bigger. Because travel was slow, even short journeys felt long. Mountains, rivers, and forests made movement even harder. So people mostly stayed within their own regions. Even nearby places felt far apart because of these barriers. And that made Europe feel more divided than it actually was. Many of Europe's borders follow natural features like mountains and rivers. Instead of random lines, geography often decided where borders would form. Mountains also acted as strong natural barriers between regions. Once these boundaries were set, they were rarely changed. Over time, these natural divisions became permanent country lines. And that's one reason why Europe has so many separate countries today. The landscape naturally favored smaller, local systems. Managing such a rugged continent was a major challenge. Natural barriers made it difficult to keep everyone connected. Communication often slowed down over these large distances. Instead of one big system, many smaller ones took shape. This kept the continent divided into many different parts. So Europe is small, but its geography is very complex. Mountains, rivers, and coastlines created natural gaps. These barriers meant that regions grew up at their own pace. Over time, these physical lines became the borders of today. The shape of the land is the reason for so many countries. And that is why Europe remains a collection of many nations.